My name is Isabel Chen, but everyone calls me Izzy. For as long as I can remember, cooking has been my sanctuary, my creative outlet, and the way I express love. Growing up in a Chinese-American household where both my parents worked long hours, I practically raised myself in our small kitchen, learning to cook from YouTube videos and the tattered cookbook my grandmother left behind. I never thought my self-taught passion would lead to the most humiliating moment of my life, or that this same humiliation would ultimately become my greatest triumph. 2 years into my relationship with Michael Winters, I thought I'd finally found someone who appreciated my culinary creations, the way I blended my Chinese heritage with modern American flavors. He always praised my cooking, asking for seconds and telling me I could easily open my own restaurant someday. That's why I was so excited when he finally invited me to cook for his family's monthly dinner. His mother, Eleanor Winters, was a respected restaurateur in our city, and while she'd always been cold toward me, I thought this might be my chance to connect with her through our shared love of food. I spent days perfecting a special dessert, a delicate panna cotta infused with lychee and rose, topped with a ginger caramel sauce that honored both my roots and my creativity. The dinner started tensely but seemed to be going okay until dessert was served. Eleanor took one bite, her face contorting in disgust before she dramatically spat it out onto her fine china plate. The table fell silent as she locked eyes with me and said loudly, clearly enough for everyone to hear, "You can't cook. Stick to ordering takeout." In that moment, as heat rushed to my face and tears threatened to spill, something inside me hardened. Something that whispered, "I'll show you exactly what I can do." Michael and I had been dating for 2 years before that fateful dinner, and looking back, the warning signs were there all along. I was just too blinded by love to see them clearly. When we first met at a mutual friend's barbecue, Michael had been genuinely impressed by the 5-spice chicken wings I'd brought. "These are incredible," he'd said, going back for thirds and fourths. "My mom owns Winters downtown, but even her chef doesn't make chicken this good." His compliment had made me glow with pride, especially coming from someone whose family was so deeply entrenched in the culinary world. In those early days, Michael seemed like my biggest cheerleader. He'd come over after work and enthusiastically try whatever experimental dish I was working on, my mapo tofu lasagna, my char siu tacos, my red bean brownie cookies. He'd take pictures for my tiny food Instagram account and suggest I start a blog. "You're a natural, Izzy," he'd say. "You've got this instinct for flavors that can't be taught." But the first crack appeared 3 months in, when I finally met his mother at a casual brunch. Eleanor Winters was tall, immaculately dressed, with perfectly colored blonde hair and a smile that never reached her eyes. "So you're the little home cook Michael mentioned," she said, looking me up and down. "How cute. Do you know the difference between blanching and parboiling, dear?" Before I could answer, she patted my hand. "Don't worry, cooking professionally is nothing like making dinner for your boyfriend. It takes years of proper training." Michael laughed it off. "Mom, stop intimidating her." But he didn't defend my knowledge or skills. That became a pattern. Eleanor making cutting remarks about my adorable little hobby, while Michael stood by, occasionally trying to smooth things over but never truly standing up for me. I tried to win her approval by bringing dishes to family gatherings, but she would always fix them in her kitchen before serving, adding more salt, changing the presentation, or sometimes transforming them so completely they were unrecognizable. "Just helping you out," she'd say with that cold smile. "When you've been in the business as long as I have, these adjustments become second nature." Meanwhile, at home, I noticed Michael slowly adopting his mother's critical tone. "This pasta is a little overdone, isn't it?" Or, "Don't you think this needs more seasoning?" Small comments that individually seemed harmless, but collectively began eroding my confidence. The ghost of my childhood hovered behind these moments. Memories of teaching myself to cook in our empty apartment, while my parents worked double shifts at their convenience store, leaving notes about what I should heat up for dinner. Back then, cooking had been my way of creating the home I craved. Now, it was becoming a battlefield where I constantly had to prove myself. Over the next year, Eleanor's attacks on my cooking abilities became more frequent and pointed, evolving from subtle digs to outright dismissals. At a Winters family 4th of July barbecue, I brought my specialty chili oil fried chicken, a recipe that had taken me months to perfect. While other guests were helping themselves to seconds, Eleanor loudly told everyone she needed to rescue my dish. She disappeared into the house with my serving platter and returned 15 minutes later with my chicken now drowning in some kind of heavy cream sauce that completely overwhelmed the delicate balance of spices I'd created. "There," she announced. "Now it's edible." When Michael's sister Ashley was compiling a family cookbook for Christmas gifts, I was thrilled when she asked me to contribute a recipe. I sent over my grandmother's char sayu recipe that I had modernized with a coffee and 5-spice rub. When the beautifully bound cookbook was distributed at Christmas, I eagerly flipped through it only to discover my recipe was nowhere to be found. Later, Ashley apologetically showed me a text from Eleanor. "Don't include Izzy's amateur recipes. They haven't been properly tested, and I won't have my family name associated with potential food poisoning." The holiday season brought another painful incident when Eleanor hosted a large Christmas party at her house. I had offered to bring dessert and spent an entire weekend crafting perfect individual yuzu tarts with Swiss meringue. At the party, Eleanor placed them in a corner of the dessert table and introduced them as Izzy's little experiment, warning guests they were unique, while offering her professionally made bûche de Noël as a reliable alternative. I watched all evening as my tarts remained untouched while guests praised Eleanor's dessert. What hurt more than Eleanor's behavior was watching Michael's transformation. The man who had once enthusiastically photographed my cooking for social media now frequently compared my dishes unfavorably to his mother's. "Mom uses actual veal stock in her risotto, not the boxed stuff," he'd comment, or "This is good but not quite restaurant quality." The most painful example of Eleanor's escalating campaign came on my 32nd birthday. Michael told me his mother wanted to give me a special gift, which made me hope she was finally warming up to me. Instead, she presented me with a gift certificate for her restaurant's weekend cooking class, the one she ran for complete beginners. "I thought it was time you learned the basics properly," she said, as Michael's family looked on. "Everyone has to start somewhere." I pushed back tears as Michael beamed, telling me how generous his mother was being, completely blind to the public humiliation she'd just served me. That night, I cried myself to sleep, while Michael slept peacefully beside me, unable to understand why I wasn't more grateful for his mother's generosity. While Eleanor's personal attacks were painful enough, her campaign against me took an even darker turn when she began actively undermining my professional aspirations. My day job was in digital marketing for a local business magazine, but my dream had always been to someday open a small restaurant featuring my Chinese-American fusion cuisine. Encouraged by positive feedback on the dishes I shared with friends and coworkers, I started a food blog called East Meets Midwest, where I posted recipes and stories about the dishes that represented my blended cultural identity. The blog gained a modest following, with around 5,000 monthly visitors. Nothing huge, but enough that a few local businesses began reaching out. A small art gallery asked if I would cater their monthly opening, and a boutique asked me to provide snacks for a fashion event. These were tiny opportunities with minimal pay, but they represented the first steps toward building a reputation outside of home cooking. I was thrilled until both businesses mysteriously canceled just days before the events. The gallery owner awkwardly admitted that someone from the local restaurant association had warned them about hiring an uncertified cook without proper food handler permits, suggesting they could face liability issues. The boutique owner was more direct. "Eleanor Winters called me personally. I can't afford to get on her bad side in this town." When I confronted Michael about his mother's interference, his response shocked me. "Mom's just looking out for the family reputation," he said defensively. "The Winters name means something in the culinary world. What if someone got sick from your food? Have you even considered that?" I reminded him that I had all the proper certifications and permits, but he just shrugged. "Mom says a weekend certificate doesn't replace years of training." The undermining continued when I decided to apply for a small business loan to potentially open a food stall at the local farmers market. I'd spent weeks preparing my business plan, financial projections, and menu concepts. The loan officer, initially enthusiastic about my application, called me 3 days later with an abrupt change of tone. "I'm sorry, but we won't be able to move forward," she said stiffly. "Upon further review, we don't believe your concept is viable in the current market." I later learned through a friend in banking that Eleanor had golf connections with the bank's regional manager and had expressed concerns about my qualifications. As my professional doors continued to close one by one, I found myself spiraling into self-doubt. Maybe Eleanor was right. Maybe my cooking wasn't good enough. Maybe I was fooling myself thinking I could compete in a professional culinary environment without formal training. When I shared these doubts with Michael, seeking Reassurance he only made things worse. Maybe Mom has a point, he said carefully. She's been in this business for 30 years. She can spot talent and problems that others miss. That night, I stood in our kitchen staring at the walls covered with shelves of cookbooks and specialty ingredients I'd collected over the years. For the first time since I was a child finding solace at our stove, cooking didn't feel like a refuge but a battleground where I was continuously defeated. The pivotal evening that would ultimately change everything began with what seemed like an olive branch. Eleanor invited Michael and me to a special dinner at Winters Downtown, her flagship restaurant. "I'd like you to bring a dish of your own," she said to me over the phone, her voice uncharacteristically warm. "Something that represents your best work. I think it's time we put our differences aside." I was suspicious but hopeful. Perhaps she was finally recognizing my efforts. Michael was ecstatic, convinced his mother was trying to make amends. "See, I told you she'd come around eventually," he said, kissing my cheek. "This is huge, Izzy. Mom never invites non-professionals to contribute to dinners at Winters." For 3 weeks, I dedicated every spare moment to creating the perfect dish. I decided on a modernized interpretation of my grandmother's lion's head meatballs, delicate pork spheres infused with ginger, scallion, and Shaoxing wine, but updated with a black garlic glaze and served atop a silky kabocha squash puree, with crispy shallots and micro cilantro. It was a dish that honored my heritage while showcasing my creative approach to traditional flavors. I practiced the recipe 12 times, adjusting the ratios, perfecting the texture, timing each component so it would travel well to the restaurant and still be at its peak when served. On the night of the dinner, we arrived at Winters Downtown with my carefully packaged creation. The restaurant was Eleanor's pride and joy. An elegant space with white tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, and impeccable service that had earned consistent 4-star reviews for over a decade. As we entered, I immediately sensed something was off. The private dining room was filled not just with family, but with about 15 people I didn't recognize. Michael whispered that they were just some of Mom's industry friends. My stomach dropped when I spotted Martin Reeves, the notoriously brutal food critic from the city newspaper, and Sophia Kim, an influential food blogger whose reviews could make or break a new restaurant. This wasn't a family dinner. It was a calculated public execution. Eleanor greeted us with practiced charm, taking my dish and handing it to her sous chef with instructions to plate it properly. My protests died in my throat as we were seated at the center of the table, with Eleanor at the head and her industry guests scattered strategically around us. Throughout the multi-course meal, tension built as each of Eleanor's exquisite dishes was served, garnering approving murmurs from the critics. Finally, my meatballs arrived, beautifully plated but noticeably different from my design. The portion sizes smaller, the presentation more vertical and precarious than I had intended. Eleanor stood, tapping her glass for attention. And now, something special. My son's girlfriend Izzy fancies herself a cook and has prepared her version of a Chinese meatball for us tonight. The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. She took a theatrical bite, and what happened next still plays in slow motion in my memory. Eleanor's face contorted in disgust. She grabbed her napkin and spat the food out, making no attempt to be discreet. "My God," she said loudly, her voice carrying through the now silent room. "You can't cook. Some people just don't have the talent. Stick to takeout." Laughter rippled through the room as my face burned with humiliation. I looked to Michael, desperately hoping he would defend me, but he sat frozen, eyes on his plate. The critics exchanged glances, some uncomfortable, others amused at the drama. I stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over my chair. "Excuse me," I managed to whisper before fleeing the dining room, tears streaming down my face. I waited outside in the cold for nearly an hour before Michael finally emerged. "You shouldn't have left like that," he said, his voice tight with annoyance. "You embarrassed me." When I asked how he could sit there while his mother publicly humiliated me, his response shattered whatever was left of our relationship. "Izzy, you need to accept Mom's professional opinion. She was trying to save you from wasting more time on something you're just not cut out for. That's what family does. They tell you the truth, even when it hurts." I took a taxi home alone. That night, packed a bag while Michael was still at his mother's restaurant, and checked into a hotel. Our 2-year relationship ended not with a fight, but with a text. "Your mother isn't just cruel, she's wrong. And you're a coward for not seeing either of those things." The weeks following that catastrophic dinner marked the darkest period of my life. I moved out of the apartment I'd shared with Michael and found a small studio on the other side of town, as far from Eleanor's culinary empire as I could get, while still keeping my marketing job. The first night in my new place, I stood in the tiny kitchenette and couldn't bring myself to even boil water for tea. Every kitchen tool I unpacked felt tainted by Eleanor's voice. "You can't cook," I subsisted, on delivery pizza, frozen microwave meals, and cereal eaten directly from the box. My once passionate Instagram account documenting my culinary creations went dormant. My food blog sat untouched as comments piled up asking where I'd gone. I couldn't bear to look at them, convinced they were all just being kind to the pathetic amateur who thought she had talent. The weekends were the worst. Before, they had been filled with farmers' market visits, experimental cooking sessions, and dinner parties where I'd try out new recipes on friends. Now I slept until noon, watched mindless television, and jumped whenever my phone pinged with texts from concerned friends. "Want to come over for dinner?" they'd ask. Or worse, "I miss your cooking. When are you having us over again?" I couldn't face them. Couldn't explain how thoroughly my confidence had been shattered. What would I say? That my boyfriend's mother had publicly declared I had no talent, that I was questioning whether my entire culinary identity had been a self-delusional fantasy? Some nights, unable to sleep, I'd find myself staring at old photos of my grandmother and me in her small kitchen when I was a child. She'd come to America late in life and spoke little English, but in the kitchen, we found our common language. "Cooking is how we show love when words fail," she used to say in Mandarin. I could still recall the precision of her knife work, the way she could tell when oil was the perfect temperature just by listening to it sizzle, how she never measured ingredients but somehow achieved perfect balance every time. Had I just been fooling myself that I'd inherited any of her talent? 6 weeks into my self-imposed culinary exile, I hit absolute rock bottom. It was Lunar New Year, a time when I'd normally spend days preparing a feast honoring both tradition and innovation. Instead, I sat alone in my apartment staring at a carton of cold lo mein from the Chinese-American restaurant down the street. On impulse, I went to my cupboard where I'd stashed away all my cooking equipment and pulled out my grandmother's cleaver, the one she'd brought from China, its blade worn thin from decades of use. I took out scallions, ginger, and garlic, the holy trinity of Chinese cooking, planning to make the simple scallion pancakes that were the first dish she ever taught me. But as I positioned the cleaver over the scallions, my hand trembled so badly I couldn't make a clean cut. Eleanor's voice echoed in my head. "You can't cook." I put the cleaver down and sobbed, sliding to the kitchen floor where I cried until there were no tears left. That night, I threw away the fresh ingredients and ate cereal for dinner, believing that perhaps Eleanor had been right all along. 3 months after the disastrous dinner at Winter's downtown, I was still going through the motions of daily life without any real joy when my college roommate, Alex Thompson, called out of the blue. Alex worked for a private equity firm specializing in restaurant investments, and we hadn't spoken in nearly a year. "Izzy Chen, you're harder to reach than a Michelin-starred chef on Saturday night," she joked when I finally answered. We made plans to meet for coffee that weekend, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something other than numbness. When we met at a small cafe far from Eleanor's culinary territory, Alex's sharp financial mind quickly picked up that something was wrong. "You look like hell and you haven't mentioned food once in 45 minutes, she observed bluntly. "That's like you not breathing." The whole story came pouring out. Eleanor's systematic undermining, Michael's betrayal, the public humiliation, and my subsequent culinary paralysis. Alex listened without interruption, her expression shifting from shock to outrage. When I finished, she leaned forward with an intensity that startled me. "Actually, I have some interesting intel about Winter's downtown you might want to hear." According to Alex, whose firm kept close tabs on the local restaurant scene, Eleanor's restaurant was struggling financially. Her concept is outdated, her prices are too high for what she's offering, and her refusal to adapt to changing tastes is killing her business, Alex explained. She's been quietly seeking investors for the past 2 months, but keeping it hushed because she doesn't want to damage her reputation. She's particularly desperate because her landlord is raising the rent next quarter. I absorbed this information with strange detachment, not yet seeing how it connected to me. Then Alex dropped the bombshell. "Our firm passed on investing because her numbers don't justify it, but she's still looking. Word is she'll consider selling a majority stake if the right offer comes along." I shook my head, wondering why Alex was telling me this. Good to know, I guess, but What does that have to do with me? Alex gave me a look that suggested I was missing something obvious. Izzy, you have a marketing background, a unique culinary point of view, and that inheritance from your grandmother sitting in investments. Have you ever considered that the universe might be offering you the perfect revenge served literally ice cold? I laughed for the first time in months, but quickly dismissed the idea. Alex, be serious. Eleanor would never sell to me. She'd rather close the restaurant. Alex's smile turned sly. Who says she needs to know it's you? My firm specializes in creating investment vehicles where the actual investors remain anonymous. I could be the face of the deal. The conversation seemed purely hypothetical until 3 days later when Michael contacted me to arrange picking up some of his things I still had in storage. When he arrived at my apartment, he seemed distracted and left his email open on his phone while using my bathroom. One message subject line caught my eye. Winters Downtown, Investor Prospectus, Confidential. I shouldn't have looked, but something compelled me to tap the notification. The email contained a detailed financial prospectus for Eleanor's restaurant, confirming everything Alex had said. The business was hemorrhaging money. Customer numbers were down 40% year over year, and they needed at least $750,000 in new investment to update the concept and keep the doors open. I quickly closed the email before Michael returned, but my mind was racing. My grandmother had left me just over $400,000 when she passed away 2 years earlier. I had been saving it for something important, possibly a down payment on my own restaurant someday. With a business loan covering the rest, I could potentially acquire a controlling interest in the very restaurant where I'd been humiliated. The idea that had seemed absurd hours earlier suddenly crystallized into a possibility. That night, I called Alex. I need to know exactly how this would work, I said, and I need to be absolutely certain it's legal. For the first time since that devastating dinner, I felt a spark reignite within me, not just for cooking, but for proving my worth on my own terms. With the seed of possibility planted, I transformed from a woman defeated by humiliation into a strategist executing a meticulous plan. First, I contacted a business attorney specializing in restaurant acquisitions to ensure every step would be legally sound. You want to purchase this restaurant anonymously? He clarified during our initial consultation. It's unusual but entirely legal as long as all disclosures are properly filed. The current owner has no legal right to know the identity of shareholders in an investment group. Next came the culinary preparation. If I was going to run a restaurant, I needed to shore up my technical skills. I enrolled in intensive weekend cooking courses at the culinary school across town, not for validation, but to fill specific gaps in my knowledge about commercial kitchen operations, food costing, and inventory management. I reached out to James Wong, a respected chef who had once complimented my food blog, and asked if he would critique my cooking honestly. I need someone who will be brutally frank about where I need improvement, I told him. Our first session was terrifying. I half expected him to confirm Eleanor's assessment. Instead, after tasting 5 of my signature dishes, he looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You have genuine talent and a unique perspective. Your techniques need refinement, but your understanding of flavor is intuitive and sophisticated." Over the next 2 months, I worked with James twice weekly, honing my skills and developing a cohesive menu concept that would showcase my Chinese-American fusion cuisine. Meanwhile, the business side progressed rapidly. Alex created a holding company called Phoenix Culinary Group, with herself as the public-facing manager. My grandmother's inheritance would provide the initial capital, and Alex helped me secure a business loan for the remainder by presenting my detailed business and marketing plan to a bank where Eleanor had no connections. I reached out to my roots, spending weekends with distant relatives in Chinatown, collecting family recipes and techniques that had been passed down for generations. I updated these dishes with contemporary techniques and presentation, creating a menu that told my family's immigrant story through food. I also began quietly recruiting staff, focusing on talented individuals who had worked under Eleanor, but left due to her demanding and critical management style. My marketing background proved invaluable as I developed a complete rebranding strategy, choosing a new name, designing a logo, and creating social media accounts that would remain dormant until the right moment. All this preparation took nearly 5 months, during which Eleanor's restaurant continued to struggle. Finally, Alex made the approach. Phoenix Culinary Group would like to discuss acquiring a majority stake in Winters Downtown, she said in her initial email to Eleanor. After weeks of negotiations, With me concealed behind corporate documents and Alex's poised representation, Eleanor agreed to sell 75% ownership. The final meeting took place at Eleanor's restaurant after hours. I waited anxiously at home while Alex handled the contract signing. "It's done," Alex texted at 9:43 p.m. She actually said she's relieved to have a competent financial team taking over the business aspects so she can focus on being the creative visionary. She added a laughing emoji. Little does she know. The keys to the restaurant that had been the site of my greatest humiliation were now legally mine. I slept more peacefully that night than I had in months. Not with thoughts of revenge, but with visions of transformation. The renovation began immediately. I gave the staff 2 weeks paid leave while a construction crew transformed the stuffy, outdated interior of Winter's downtown into a warm, modern space that reflected my culinary vision. The heavy damask drapes and crystal chandeliers gave way to clean lines, natural wood, and subtle lighting that created an inviting atmosphere. The white tablecloths disappeared, replaced by handcrafted wooden tables that encouraged a more relaxed dining experience. Per our agreement, Eleanor retained 25% ownership, but would have no operational control for the first year, a clause Alex had brilliantly negotiated as standard practice during transition. She believed she was simply stepping back while financial experts revitalized her struggling business. She had no idea the extent of changes underway. The staff returned to find not just a physical transformation, but a complete cultural shift. I introduced myself as the new executive chef and managing partner, watching their faces register shock and then, often, thinly veiled satisfaction. Many had suffered under Eleanor's critical management style and welcomed the change. "I remember you," said Diego, a talented sous chef who had been with the restaurant for years. "You're the one who brought those amazing meatballs that night. Chef Eleanor was wrong about you. That dish was excellent." With the team assembled, I shared my vision. We would reopen as Chen's Fusion, a restaurant celebrating the immigrant experience through food that honored tradition while embracing innovation. Every dish would tell a story. My story, my family's story, and by extension, the American story of cultural blending and adaptation. We spent 2 intensive weeks training together, with me working alongside every staff member rather than above them. I encouraged their input, incorporated their ideas, and fostered a collaborative kitchen culture that stood in stark contrast to Eleanor's hierarchical approach. Behind the scenes, the marketing campaign was gaining momentum. Local food bloggers received mysterious invitations to a transformative dining experience, and our social media accounts began releasing tantalizing glimpses of new menu items. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Reservations for our opening night filled within hours of the announcement. 2 days before the grand reopening, I sent a personal invitation to Eleanor and Michael for a special preview dinner to honor the restaurant's legacy while celebrating its future. On opening night, I stood in the kitchen of what was now Chen's Fusion, surveying the team as they prepared for service. The menu featured dishes like 5-spice short rib with Sichuan peppercorn jus, Mapo tofu arancini, and my grandmother's lion's head meatballs. The very dish Eleanor had spat out, now refined and perfected. The dining room filled quickly with excited guests, but I kept watching the door. At precisely 7:30 p.m., Eleanor and Michael arrived. I observed through the kitchen window as they took in the transformed space, Eleanor's face registering first. Confusion, then dawning horror as she saw the new name and menu. I waited until they were seated before stepping out of the kitchen in my chef's coat embroidered with Executive Chef Isabel Chen. Eleanor's face drained of color. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, rising halfway from her seat. "You can't possibly be running this restaurant." I maintained the calm professionalism I had practiced for this moment. "Actually, I am. Phoenix Culinary Group is my investment vehicle. I own 75% of what was formerly Winter's downtown. You still own 25% as per our agreement." Michael looked between us in confusion. "Izzy, what are you talking about? How is this possible?" Eleanor's shock gave way to fury. "This is a trick. It's illegal. I never would have sold to you." The restaurant had gone quiet, with nearby diners watching the drama unfold. I kept my voice level. Everything was completely legal and transparent. The only thing not disclosed was my identity, which was not legally required. You sold the restaurant because it was failing under your management. Now I'm going to make it succeed. Michael reached for my arm. "Izzy, we should talk about this privately. I've missed you. Maybe this is a sign we should try again." I gently removed his hand. There's nothing to discuss, Michael. You chose your side when you sat silently while your mother humiliated me. This isn't about you or Eleanor anymore. It's about me finally believing in myself enough to create something authentic. I signaled to the server to bring their first course, my grandmother's scallion pancakes, elevated with duck confit and a black vinegar reduction. I recommend you try the food before making judgments. You might be surprised by what someone without formal training can create when they cook from the heart. In the 6 months following that confrontational opening night, Chen's Fusion transformed from a bold gamble into a certified success story. The first professional review appeared 3 weeks after our opening, with the headline, Phoenix Rising. Chen's Fusion breathes new life into tired culinary scene. Martin Reeves, the same critic who had witnessed my humiliation at Eleanor's hands, wrote, Chef Isabel Chen brings a fresh, authentic voice to the city's dining landscape. Her innovative Chinese-American cuisine speaks volumes about cultural identity, family legacy, and personal resilience. Each dish tells a story, and it's one worth hearing. Reservations became increasingly difficult to secure as word spread about our unique concept and the warmth of our dining experience. Our weekday lunch service, something Eleanor had abandoned years ago as unprofitable, became particularly popular among young professionals seeking flavors that felt both comforting and exciting. The restaurant's success extended beyond the dining room. Our social media presence exploded as guests shared photos of their meals, particularly our Heritage series, dishes that paired traditional Chinese cooking techniques with locally sourced Midwestern ingredients. My online following, once a small community of food enthusiasts, grew to over 50,000 engaged followers who resonated with the story of cultural fusion and personal triumph underlying our concept. Financial validation soon followed the critical acclaim. Within 4 months, we had not only recouped the initial investment, but had begun turning a profit that exceeded the restaurant's performance under Eleanor's management by nearly 30%. The business aspects that Eleanor had neglected, online ordering, a curated wine program, special events, and cooking classes, all contributed to a diversified revenue stream that strengthened our financial foundation. As the restaurant flourished, I found myself healing in unexpected ways. The kitchen that had once been a site of humiliation became a place of daily joy and creative expression. I no longer cooked to prove myself to others, but to honor my heritage and share my unique perspective. The crippling self-doubt that had paralyzed me after Eleanor's public rejection gradually dissolved as I witnessed guests genuinely enjoying my food. Most meaningful was the culture we created within the restaurant. Unlike Eleanor's fear-based hierarchy, Chen's Fusion operated on mutual respect and collaborative creativity. Staff turnover, which had been high under previous management, dropped to nearly zero. Line cooks proposed dish ideas that sometimes made it onto our specials menu. Servers contributed thoughts on wine pairings and presentation. Everyone had a voice, creating a sense of shared ownership that translated into exceptional guest experiences. 4 months after opening, I received an email that marked a significant milestone in my journey. Lisa Nguyen, a culinary student in NUPBT her final year, asked if she could stage intern in our kitchen. Your story and approach to fusion cuisine has inspired me to embrace my Vietnamese heritage in my cooking, she wrote. I would be honored to learn from you. I remembered my own insecurity and lack of mentorship, and immediately accepted. Lisa became the first of several young chefs we took under our wing, particularly those from immigrant backgrounds who were navigating the complex waters of honoring tradition while finding their unique voice. As for Eleanor, she maintained her 25% ownership, but kept her distance from daily operations. Occasionally, I would see her name on the reservation list, always for a table in the corner where she would sit with industry associates, silently, evaluating our food and service. She never spoke directly to me during these visits, but I noticed she always cleaned her plate. 10 months after our opening, I was invited to speak at the annual Women in Culinary Arts Conference. As I scanned the audience before beginning my presentation on authenticity and innovation in fusion cuisine, I spotted Eleanor seated in the back row. I spoke honestly about my journey, the self-doubt, the rejection, and ultimately the self-trust. That led to creating a restaurant authentic to my vision. After the talk, as attendees mingled during the reception, Eleanor approached me, her expression unreadable. Your Xiaolongbao technique has improved, she said stiffly. The pleating is more consistent. Coming from Eleanor, this constituted high praise. Before I could respond, she added, the restaurant is doing well, better than I expected. She turned to leave, then paused. You've proven your point, Isabel. Without waiting for my response, she walked away. I watched her go, realizing that I no longer craved her approval or feared her criticism. The validation I had once desperately sought from her now felt irrelevant compared to the satisfaction of creating something true to myself. Later that night, standing in the kitchen of Chen's Fusion during the dinner rush, I looked around at the orchestrated chaos of a successful service. Cooks calling orders, servers rushing in and out, the sizzle of woks and the aroma of five spice filling the air. I thought about the long journey from that first humiliating dinner to now owning the very space where I'd been told I couldn't cook. The greatest triumph wasn't proving Eleanor wrong. It was learning to believe in myself even when others didn't. Cooking is ultimately about nourishment, not just of the body, but of the soul. My grandmother had taught me that food carries our stories, our heritage, and our love. In reclaiming my passion and sharing it authentically with others, I had found a healing that went beyond revenge or vindication. I had found my true voice. Have you ever had someone tell you that you weren't good enough at something you loved? How did you respond to that negativity? Did you let it defeat you, or did it fuel you to prove them wrong? I'd love to hear your stories of overcoming doubt in the comments below. If this story of culinary redemption resonated with you, please consider subscribing for more tales of resilience and transformation. Thank you for joining me on this journey from heartbreak to triumph. And remember, the most authentic ingredient in any recipe is your own unique perspective. May you find the courage to share your gifts with the world, regardless of who tries to diminish them.